welcome to the library. We are doing a panel on understanding the transgender experience. We have some parents of transgender individuals and some students. And they're here to answer all your questions and teach you about their experience. It's an incredibly valuable experience to be able to walk in someone else's shoes that you never would be able to on your own. So I also want you to check out our book lists before the end of the day. We have a whole bunch of book lists for all ages, everything you can possibly imagine. And we have an event coming up on November 18th called Family is a Rainbow, where we have a gathering of like-minded individuals, and it's all wonderful. So I'm going to let Jana introduce everybody. Is that okay? Okay.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks Megan from the Petaluma Regional Library for helping us out. So I'm hoping without microphones I'm able to be heard. It's kind of a good room here, good acoustics. So speakers notice that we don't have microphones, so we'll have to project. And I just want to thank my panelists. I want to thank Hope and Abby and Carol for being willing to be here and share their stories. And we're each going to have a time to introduce ourselves. So other than the fact that I just said their names, I'll let them all introduce themselves as we go. And I'm Jana Barkin. My pronouns are she, her, and I do this work because I'm the mom, well, because I care, but also because I'm the mother of a transgender person. And he brought me along on this journey. He showed up and he was himself, and he told me and showed me and didn't tell me and had crying fits and many, many different things along the path to get us from him being born and being born in a body that we assigned or assumed, we could say, female at birth. And as we know, we look at a baby's outer body and we name a sex, which up until recently has been also equal to gender. But that's not really what the human scope is and what I've learned along the way. And that, yes, while many people just never question this sex that they were assigned or assumed at birth, there's a good percent of the population that does, and this is worldwide. It's not just here. It's not just in liberal, progressive communities. It happens everywhere. There are LGBTQ people in every walk of our lives, in all sectors, large and small, poor, rich, people of color, people that are of European descent, just everywhere in the world. There have been, even anthropologically, gender diverse people within the community. And I love seeing the nodding over here, because if there's a panelist who maybe has a different idea or wants to add to anything I'm saying today, let me know with a wave. Pretty good peripheral vision. And that goes for you all as well. Even though this is a presentation and I have a PowerPoint, which is not the whole thing, I want people to feel like this is a dialogue. It's a small group. I see some familiar faces. And also remembering that we want to be really respectful, that people are here sharing personal stories. Come on in. And that we, even if we have different ideas, we're going to talk about them in respectful ways, and that this isn't a place where we're debating the existence of trans people or whether or not we should support them, because the truth is people are here in our communities. And at the same time, we may have different ideas about that, and we might be confused or we might have questions, and that's okay too. Just setting the parameters for this particular discussion. And we want this to be a safe place to ask questions and also respectful. So let's see if there's any other logistics. People will be open to questions, and we may decide that's not a question for me or for Carol or for Hope or for Abby. That doesn't mean your question is invalid. It just might be not one that the people here are going to answer. And if I can help us get other answers, I would love to do that. So I've been doing this work for about 7 or 8, I guess more like 10 years, but I started a group in Marin County for parents of trans and gender questioning youth 7 years ago. And so we have 350 people on our mailing list. That means that 350 people have told me that they need our support when it comes to having a transgender or a gender expansive or questioning kid. So it's a lot, and that's just in Marin, right? And so I know also that the community here in Petaluma and in the bigger Sonoma County also have a lot of families that are interested and learning and maybe not sure about what all this means. And I wasn't sure either. You know, I've been a preschool teacher since I was 25, so that was a long time. And I didn't know what I didn't know. So I knew that there could be gay people that are children at some point, but I didn't really learn or think about transgender experience. So, you know, it's said in our country that 90 to 95% of people, depending on where you are, will say they know someone who's gay. And that could be gay, lesbian, bisexual perhaps, but only, it's growing numbers. So when I first started, it was only 5%. Now they're saying it's about 20% of people. So that's a big growth in the time that I've been doing the work of people who know someone who's transgender. Or that they know someone who's transgender. Because unlike a gay couple that might be walking together and you can see that perhaps this is a gay couple, trans people don't always announce who they are. And so we've always been going to the bathroom with trans people, and we've always had them in our communities, we just didn't know. And trans people have been met with discrimination, challenges in the workplace, challenges in families. So when my son, this is a picture of him when he was little, it happens to be the cover of my book, which you can find here in the library. This is him when he was only 6 or 7, and he was on the baseball team. He was always on the baseball team, and it couldn't be softball. It had to be baseball. This is still when we considered him a girl, and we used the she, her pronouns, but that is not who my son is, and I had to learn how to support him along the way. And this was happening, he's 25 now, so you know, this was a long time ago in our time span. Like, yeah, I don't know, you might have been born, Hope, but Abby wasn't here yet when my son was this age. And here he is when he went to his freshman year of college, which was also, you know, he's older now. He lets me share his story, so when I share things about him, he's given me that permission. Yeah. And what I want to ask to engage with right now is, what do you notice? Let's go back a slide. What do you notice about this kid? And please just call it out. What do you notice about this kid right here? Happy.
Second baseman.
Second base! He did. He also loved to steal bases because he was taller than other kids his age, and he had these really long legs, and like he would go 3 steps and he'd be on the next base. It was really funny. So yeah, he was happy, he was engaged, he's looking straight at the camera. He has the light in his eyes, right? You can see the light. So how about parents? Anyone a parent in this room? So how do we feel when we can see the light in our kiddos' eyes? Really good. It's a good indicator of how things are going, right? What happens when that light is not there? I mean, that's like, yeah, punch in the gut, you know? It's like we feel it. And sometimes we're really at a loss to how to help, how to get that, how to spark that light again, right? And then what you can see again, what do you see there? Yeah, same light, right?
Yeah.
There's the eyes, there's the smile, he's looking right at me, he's happy for me to take his picture, but there was a deep time in between where this was not the case. And I mean to maybe slip a shot in there. It's a little hard to look at those photos of when he wasn't himself, when he wasn't light and bright. And that for him was maybe 5th grade. It was when puberty started. A little before that, because in 4th grade, the divisions among boys and girls traditionally start to show up, and my kid wouldn't know where to go. Like, you heard this wonderful greeting. What was it? It was boys and gals,
Non-binary pals.
guys, gals, non-binary pals. I love that. It's inclusive. I also just say friends. I love that. It's inclusive. But my kid didn't know where to go because there was a lot of boys and girls. And he always dressed the way he dressed. Even when he wasn't on the baseball team. Hello. Friends are wanting to be here too. He always wore an outfit that had a hat, no matter what. T-shirt, jeans, hat. Hat was really important. It was like a talisman. You couldn't really leave home without a hat. And I'm looking around seeing who's wearing a baseball hat right now. So why was the hat so important to him, right? Yeah, well, he wasn't bald, but that's why it's might be important for you, right? I don't even know. Maybe you don't care, but you just really love to wear a hat. But for him, it was his talisman. And so, and again, I always use he, him pronouns, but it was a time that we still use girl. This is what I usually read from my book, so I think I'll do that. So this is a chapter in the book, but is a time in my kid's life where I was like, very interesting. You ever do that? It's very interesting. I will file this away, parent, and see what happens later, right? And you don't even realize you're filing it away sometimes. So here's the story. I'm going to paraphrase a bit. Amaya had a vivid imaginary play life when he was young, and in the world he interacted with all sorts of characters. He liked to be alone when he was doing this, and we could hear him playing, as you do in your house. And he had a friend named Rocco, and Amaya would talk to Rocco and other friends when he thought nobody was listening. And Amaya also liked to dress up when he played, she at the time. And unlike older sister Emily, who always chose the frilly dresses, very typical of what you might expect a girl to do, when Amaya played dress up, it was always hero gear, or more interestingly and important to him, a jacket and tie. That was really the desired dress up, not just a superhero cape. It was the jacket and tie. One time when he was about 3, I watched a notice as Amaya played with Rocco, and he had a bunch of toys, and among them there were baby dolls, G.I. Joes. Like I said, I was a preschool teacher. I was very aware of how to make a very gender-inclusive space already. I didn't want him to think that he couldn't play with dolls, or G.I. Joes, or balls, or cars, right? All the things were there. And in the midst of him playing, I heard him say, "I wish to be Grandpa, Grandpa." And he's singing to himself. And I said, he's 3, doesn't he know already that girls grow up to be grandmas and boys grow up to be grandpas? Okay, well, even developmentally, the American Academy of Pediatrics will say, yes, by 4, stable sense of gender is established. Oh, very interestingly, I said to my kid, well, do you know that girls grow up to be grandmas? And he looked at me and he said, I'm a boy. And I was like, well, boys have a penis and girls have a vagina, I said. And we talked a bit more, we acknowledged the parts, and he internalized, he's a girl. Which could be accurate for many people, but I do believe this was a time of ignorance of my part, not to be judging anyone or myself, but I discounted the incident, which was perhaps his very first outward affirmation of his inner knowing. I know now his gender is male and always inside felt that way to him, but I didn't tell him anything about that. I said it was perfectly fine to be a girl who liked to wear boy things like this. I gendered clothing. I hadn't had the words yet to say, well, perhaps you are a boy, right? And I do feel this was pivotal for my child. I discounted the early affirmation. he internalized what I said, and we weren't able to discuss it until really he was in puberty, and things were getting more intense. Like I said, the light was not there. And he would get invitations but decline them, and he would not go out. He went to school. When I brought it up in middle school, they were like, he seems happy here, everything's fine, it must be a home thing. I was like, well. And what I know is that people will do what they need to do to function so that they can just go on day to day. So some kids will still do really, really well in school even when they're struggling. And that's for all kids, not just gender expansive kids. And we know that there's a mental health crisis in our youth today. And trans and non-binary youth have another layer of intersectionality. People of color and trans also have another layer of intersectionality, different languages. So we want to acknowledge that, my experience and what I'm offering today is only because I learned through my experience. I'm not really the expert on being transgender because I am not that. And I'll get into that. I'll share my own identity. So again, I just really honor that there's people here of lived experience that want to share with us. So just getting into a few more details before we go to our panel. And that's really what I want to highlight. But it is helpful when we're on the same page. So we're talking about gender today. Sexuality is separate, and of course, all these parts of us intertwine. So gender or sexual orientation is about how we relate and the words we use to define those relationships with others who we're attracted to, both or inclusive of emotional attraction, romantic attraction, and sexual attraction. And then there's also gender, which is the inner held sense of who one is, and that exists in the cultural norms of the day. So while people say, well, we can't just be this or that, well, perhaps. So there's a biological component, there's a social component, and then there's the psychological component. And these all interrelate. And this can get a little bit complex. So if it does, that's okay. It took me a long time to even be able to say these things without reading them over and over. But we have amazing resources now. If I had done this talk 10, well, I couldn't have done the talk 10 years ago because I wasn't prepared yet. But there were no books. There were 2 books, and one was The Transgender Child. It's amazing, and they just updated the transgender teens, so that is an incredible book, highly recommend. And then I also see Diane Ehrensaft, her Gender Creative Child here, and her original was The Gender Born, Gender Made. So those were my 2 books, Transgender Child, Gender Born, Gender Made, and they helped me, but really who taught me the most is trans people themselves. So it's the puzzle, and we're here to learn together, and it's okay to make mistakes when we're respectful, and when we own that it is our own job and not someone else's to do that work of teaching us. It's like, oh, I made a mistake. Okay, let me learn from that. So gender has 3 components. It's not just our bodies. The bodies we have on the outside show up as a result of our DNA and our chromosomes and our hormones and all those interactions. And sometimes the body parts match someone's inner sense of gender, but sometimes they don't. And we have some reasoning for that, science, but I'm not a scientist, and I'm not really here to show all of that tonight. It would take like a whole different presentation. But we can perhaps refer to a body variance that is able to be seen on the outside, which is people who are born intersex. Have people heard this word before? Yeah. I see some nodding, I see some question marks over the head. So an intersex body is, or person or body, is one that has been born with perhaps ambiguous genitalia or a combination, or perhaps somebody has a certain part on the outside and different parts on the inside. So someone with a penis can also have a uterus. Again, this isn't common, But at the same time, I've been told, and I've read it in a few sources, that intersex people are as common as redheads. As redheads. So, and by some data, even more common, thank you. And these are because we don't have the data. It's just like any part of life that we haven't studied enough for whatever reason we haven't, and we can go into that too, but we just have not learned enough. And people have not felt comfortable being visible and being part of things like this until fairly recently in our communities. So there's a diversity among bodies, and that can also be diversity how our hormones and our hormone receptors in our brain are interacting. Dr. Stephen Rosenthal at UCSF does some really great talks about this. And actually would go, I'm going to come back to identity, gender expression. Actually, let's go to identity. Identity is that inner held sense of who we are with regard to gender. So this is where I'm sharing my identity. So I was born with a body that was assumed or assigned female. And that's been who I am. In my inner sense of who I am, I feel female, and I don't question that. So that means I'm cisgender. I was born with a certain sex assigned at birth, and I feel the same as that. It matches. So that inner identity sometimes doesn't match for people, and so we've come to some words. Transgender is one word. Non-binary is another, and they sometimes interplay, and our panel is going to share a lot more about that, so I'm not going to go too far along that. And then there's gender expression, how we like to express ourselves with regard, well, sometimes it's not about us thinking about it regard to gender, but it also might signal others. So even though we might not have thought my son was putting on a hat because he wanted everyone to see him as a boy, I don't know if he thought that, but he did it. It was like, it just felt right to him to do that. And he asked him when he was 5 to cut his hair short, crew cut. He called himself Spike. He gave himself many nicknames over the years. Spike was one, T-Ball was another, AJ was another, and then he ended up keeping his name. Go figure. He said, "Thank you for giving me a gender-neutral name." I said, "I didn't think it was, but I'm glad that you like it." It's just like, you just don't know. Some kids change their names, some adults. I'm talking about youth mostly, but it's really all people. And, I know some adults that are not transgender and have changed their names. So it's not just the trans experience, it's just that people get hung up when it is. More so than if someone just changes their name. And says, "By the way, my name is Pat now. I know you used to name me as Chris, but now I'm Pat." Why? I just really like Pat. Can you call me Pat? Yeah, I'll call you Pat. Okay. But when it becomes someone is transgender or someone is non-binary and they're inviting you into that experience, somehow we get hung up. Others? Agender. So I already said what cisgender is, but sometimes we need to hear things more, like a lot of times. Hope, do you want to say what cisgender is in your mind?
Sure. I think of cisgender as, a pretty easy way to think about it is someone who's not trans. So if you grew up as, I'll use the terms AMAB and AFAB, assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth. If you grew up as AMAB and identify as a boy, then you are cisgender, and if you grew up as AFAB and identify as a girl, then you are cisgender. But if there's any variation or any personal identity that you feel is different than that, then you're not cisgender. Or you are, if you choose to identify that way. There's a lot of really it's, in a lot of cases, it's your choice how you choose to identify on that.
Yes, I'm so glad you brought that up. And I meant to let you all introduce yourselves before I asked you questions, so we'll come back to that. Sorry, out of order. That was such a great point, is that all these words only mean something if someone chooses that word. So I'm not going to tell someone, this is you, you are cisgender because you were born this way. But it's a way of describing ourselves. So until I had a child who showed me that there was something other than feeling right in his own skin, which was assigned female at birth, I didn't know all these words, right? So cisgender is a word that we use because trans people were saying, well, why are we the only ones who have this prefix? Why don't we all get a prefix so that there's no one group singled out as being other? So cis, C-I-S, is cis in Latin is same. So that is where the word is. Okay, we'll go into more definitions. Agender is someone, Abby, do you want to mention that?
I don't know a ton about it, but I think it means like someone who doesn't really identify with having any gender, which is kind of odd because it is an identifier, but
Right, and so someone might not even want that, right? But it is someone who perhaps has not a sense of gender. Hope you looked like you wanted to expand.
Yeah, kind of building on what Abby said, it's a way of putting words to something that can't really be described. Like, there's an identity that's kind of the lack of identity. When you're agender, you don't really fit into any of the societal, like the determined gender identities that we've kind of labeled so far. And it's more of like I don't really fit into any of these things. I kind of have my own experience, which for a lot of trans people is their experience, because everyone has their different experiences. But agender is kind of like, I'm not trans, I'm not necessarily non-binary, although some people do put agender under the non-binary spectrum. But it's kind of just not really fitting into any of those identities and just having your own definition of it.
Thank you both. So A is sometimes put in front as a prefix for not, or no, or absence of, like asexual, which you may or may not have heard of, but some people feel that that word helps define them, helps give words to some feeling. And that's kind of why sometimes labels can be important, but also it's only important if the person feels it's right for them. So again, we could expand on so much of this, but perhaps we can see gender as a spectrum, or some people say a universe.
You put the word, the abbreviation, etc. I'm feeling missing a statement, and that is Homo sapien and or human being. Why aren't those two phrases there?
I really like that, and I'm going to think about adding them, that idea that perhaps there are many labels, and one of our labels is I'm a human, and leave it at that. Yes, so I love that, and I think that it's inclusive, right? It's like that's one label, and then people might feel like, yes, I have a label, and I also want to offer more labels so people can better understand my own experience. And I appreciate that because it's true, and this is why I do the work, is I believe that trans rights, gay rights, women's rights, men's rights, it's all human rights. So I appreciate that. And here are a variety of pronouns, and we'll have our introductions in a moment, and we'll hear everyone's different pronouns, which, again, we are traditionally a culture of two different types of pronouns, a male-identified pronoun and a female-identified pronoun, and for a long time that has not worked for many people, and yet they've had no part of speech that they can use that makes them feel comfortable when people are talking to them. And I personally cannot say how that feels, only a little bit. In that my name's Jana, but when you see it written, you don't always know that. And one time or two times, if you know me and you say Jana or Yana or Jenna, I might not mind it if you say it once or twice. But if you know me, and you consistently get my name wrong, even if after I've told you my name is Jana, and you say Jonna, and it's hard to remember, and I just feel, how would I feel? Yeah, like discounted, disrespected, maybe like I'm just like, well, I must not be very important to this person. And most of the time, it doesn't bother me that much, but there's been a couple of times when that one person just won't do it. And I'm like, really? What is this about? Your name's tricky too, and I've got it. So what's going on here, right? And so I think that we can relate to it, and yet maybe not, because she and he and this all fits for us. So they, them pronouns now in the Webster's Dictionary and all the grammar guides is now a singular pronoun that has been adopted, and depending on where you are, you'll see it more and more, but you heard me using it.
I would like to add that it's always been a singular pronoun, just people didn't quite understand that. Because like, if you see a wallet on the floor, you say, oh, someone dropped their wallet, I better go give it to them. And that's a great use of they, them being singular, but people have a difficulty translating that into trans identities.
Did you hear that distinction that Hope just made? I'm seeing nodding. It's like, oh, my glasses are here, and after everyone goes, oh, someone left their glasses here, I wonder who it was, maybe they'll call. Right? It's like we're already using it, but maybe not for a specific individual. So I really like that way of pointing it out. And at the same time, we're adapting. There are other pronouns, sie, them, sie, zir, tite. There's a lot of other pronouns. These may be confusing. We might not have heard them. And the less common ones are more commonly used within communities that are LGBTQ focused or friendly, or within friendship groups, because they haven't been commonly used, and perhaps they will get expanded. We sometimes call them neo-pronouns, meaning neo, but new, but also meaning neo, Latin for noun. So it's noun pronouns. So a little different than these words, which maybe are not meanings, but maybe an example of noun pronoun, neo-pronoun.
I don't know, there's a lot of them.
There's a lot. I mean, there's an expansiveness of, like,
pretty much like every day there's new pronouns being created, because people find different pronouns that fit their identity. So.
Yeah. And will we expect everyone to get that at once? No. But they, them, we would really like folks to practice adapting, and we're going to talk about that too. All right. So it is, as we agreed, a matter of respect. We want to feel respected. All right, this is the last thing I'm going to say about Amaya. He's unique. He had to write this. I'm unique because I'm a girl dressed as a guy. I also act like a boy. Every time I meet someone new, they think I'm a boy. That is why I'm unique. He was 10. So there was the little kid who said I'm a grandpa, and then there's still this kid knowing that there's something unique. And I'm so glad, again, it's still positive here, right? It's like, I'm unique, awesome. You know? But that's not always the case, and there can be suffering, and sometimes we label that gender dysphoria, and it can be a discontent, or it can be a deep depression or deep anxiety. It can range. And what we know is that people have lived with gender dysphoria and also have struggled to live with gender dysphoria all through time, and that recently, in the last 50 to 60 years of humanity, there's been more and more gender-affirming care, and now in the last 20 years, we have also been giving gender-affirming care to youth. And we'll get into that a little bit tonight as well. But gender-affirming care is not necessarily medical. It's getting to wear the hairstyle you want, and getting to use the pronouns that most affirm you, and perhaps medical care. And only until a person explores this for themselves can they find this feeling of what my son describes as complete for now. Complete, he was questioned, do you think you're going to need more things to help you? And he said, no, I'm complete for now. Because he was young, and he knows that all of us go through life not really, I'm going to, actually I'm going to say this. I want to get to the panel, but I want to say, just give us some statistics, because I think some of us that do really need that evidence, this can really be helpful. So 26% of LGBT or BGT youth say that their biggest problems are not feeling accepted by family, trouble at school and bullying, and a fear to be out in open. So that's 26% of the youth say that that's their biggest problem. I would say that's probably a little higher from what I've been reading lately. Visibility has not necessarily brought more acceptance, so that's a challenge. The good thing is that these youth who do come out to their immediate families and are supported in some way are reporting more happiness than those who can't. And anything that we can do to increase the positive mental health of our youth is going to go far. And our best practices are changing. Just like we heard the librarian introduce, this is how we change, is by just changing. And by me telling you my pronouns. I didn't need to. You were going to use my right pronouns. I didn't need to, but I do that so that when others do it, we are tuned in and people feel comfortable. Oh, if I share my pronouns with you, you might share your pronouns with me. And we all do have stories to tell. And Abby.
I think another reason it's really important to share pronouns, even if you don't, if you're cisgender, is to normalize the activity and not single out transgender individuals.
Yes, exactly. So I'm going to leave our PowerPoint now, and I'm just going to leave that up there until we get to the next part. And I'd love to just have each of you introduce yourselves with your pronouns, and then I'll have you go last, Carol, and then I'll show your slide at that point, and you can use that to help you.
Before we do that, can we get a round of applause for these people for sharing their stories with us, because it's such hard
Audience, and I can see the gears turning, and once in a while they go, and then they go, okay, okay. So I consider myself a lifelong learner, and every time I do one of these panels and have a new panelist, and this is the first time that all three of these panelists have been with me, and so I learn every time, so I'm really excited. So thank you. Hopefully you go first, introduce yourself, and take the time you'd like to talk to the folks.
My name is Hope. I use they, she pronouns, which means that I prefer they, them. And for me, it's pretty strongly prefer. And I'm also all right with she, her pronouns. I go to Novato High School. I am in the MSA program, Creative Writing and Sculpture and Ceramics. Let's see, I think I came out 2 years ago, and I got pretty lucky. I have my two supportive parents right there, and they've been pretty amazing to have as parents through this journey.
Good for now?
Yeah.
Thanks.
My name is Abby or Abigail. I don't mind either one. And my pronouns are she, they. Also, either one is fine. I go to Mark Day School, which is a really wonderful school. My dad teaches there, and I came out about 1.5 years ago, and I was also very lucky. I'm their siblings or sister, so I also have really great parents.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I have two sons, 19 and 20 years old, and my oldest is Gabe, and he's a trans man. And yeah, I've never done this. I thought, well, he's never really wanted me to talk about him, and just recently when Jenna asked me to come and join the panel, I checked in with, I pretty much, I think I told Jen, I don't think so, but I'll check with Gabe, and he is at the point now where, he's at the point now where he really is, he wants me to talk to people and feels that it's important. And so he gave me the thumbs up to come and talk. So perhaps, might help other parents navigate having a young teen who comes out as transgender. And I'm just here to offer support and answer any questions. I thought this was like
Well, I want to say that Carol, in her thinking, came up with this timeline. I was like, wow, all parents, we could do this. Because what I noticed is that there are some major, we're not going to talk about everything on the timeline, but what you wanted to do is highlight these really important times in our lives where there were these markers of life.
Yeah, I'm a graphic designer and an illustrator, and so, and I've worked with corporate America, Williams Sonoma, Aetna, worked in New York and San Francisco, in LA, and I have a lot of personal hobbies too. I thought I would just tell you a little about me a little bit, and so I also have a letterpress, little shop that was a family business. My grandfather and my uncle were letterpress printers, and I got into it more as a hobby. And so I do that just in my garage. Just kind of helped me, like as a parent, just have something that I could do and express myself and somewhat escape. Sometimes, and I also row with the North Bay Rowing Club here in Petaluma, row on the river, and that just gives me time to just get out of my head and focus on the water and not tipping, falling into the water.
Good metaphor.
Yeah. So, anyway, and I would say I have a really good relationship with my two sons. We're pretty open, and we have always been able to talk about most things. And my son Gabe he's always been very articulate. I think I was lucky that way, where if something was going on with him, even when he was 3 or 4, he spoke very early. He could tell me what was going on. And he's a theater guy. If you go to Cinnabar Theater, he was in a lot of the performances when he was living here in Petaluma. And I'm extremely proud of him. That was something that really helped him, just as a person, and helped him express himself. It also provided a huge, strong circle of friends as he was transitioning as a young teenager. It just gave him they helped him feel completely accepted here in Petaluma. I wasn't sure. I didn't know how this was going to go. And it was just, he just really developed a strong circle of friends that were huge in his life and in my life. My house was the house that people could come to and be whoever they are, whatever they want to be. And so I tried to keep a very, very open mind. And now he lives in Southern California, and he's studying theater and writing, and he's got a job, and he said he's 20, and he's living on his own, and still is a very social guy, and just doing really well. But it took a while to get to that point. It was, Jenna referred to dysphoria, and I didn't really know what gender dysphoria was when Gabe was, when was that, 2015, when he was 13 years old.
I don't know the word dysphoria.
Yeah, one where you can
Dysphoria is
It's individual.
Yeah, it's specific to everyone. Everyone has their different experiences with it, and it's kind of the feeling of not being comfortable in the body that you're in, or not being comfortable with the way that people see you in your body. Generally specific to trans folks, and it's kind of like it goes along with both pre-transition and then through your transition, the feeling of not feeling comfortable with the body you're in and not feeling comfortable with the way others see you. So.
And you know, I'm glad you asked that because, see the clown picture? This is how I didn't know what it was. And this is how Gabe articulated it to me. He said, imagine, and this was one night, he was 13, he was going to bed. We were just talking, he was having a lot of anxiety. This was like, there was something going on with my kid. He was a great student, social, and then all of a sudden, something was wrong. And so he said, imagine if you're a clown, and you know that's what you do. You go to parties, you entertain people, you wake up in the morning, you put the smile on your face, you put the big clown outfit on, the shoes, and you go out there and you do your parties and everyone sees this clown. But what they don't see is like who you are inside. And then you come home and you take this off and you know that you're not happy, you're not any of these things that the world sees. And then, but you know who you are. You know who you are. And you don't know how to make that connection. And he was 13 telling me this, and to me, it made a lot of sense. I took him seriously. Like, okay, there is something going on. And I guess that whole year that he did start talking to me like that, I wrote down like all these things that happened. I won't point out each one, but kind of the theme for that year was, since he was experiencing dysphoria, I focused not so much, I know there's a lot of people who will read up on what this is and learn and study in their books. And in 2015, not so much, but yeah. But so I wanted to get Gabe around people who could support him. I didn't think I could learn quick, like I didn't know how to do this. So I wanted to get Gabe around people who could support him. And I found through a couple different therapists and someone who could and who kind of helped him through this whole point of anxiety, depression, and dysphoria. It was all kind of tangled up. And so that was the year to just get him support. And then the next year he was 14. And so 2016 was probably the hardest year of my life, I believe. And the goal at that point was to keep Gabe alive and get him, not so much like around people who could support him, but somehow get him the coping skills he needed to figure out who he was. And I was questioning too, like what does he mean? Is he really inside, like male? Like, is this real? Like, is this real? And am I just trying to keep my kid alive, so I'm just believing everything he says? Or so I did, I didn't know, and so I went through a lot of this, just working with a huge team. I mean, the team kind of evolved. It was the school district, the IEP team. IEP is a document that just kind of helps individuals who need a special type of education. And so I worked with the school district. I worked with, just to find a place you can have your kids. There's other places in the school district that educate your kids, and I wanted to find that environment where Gabe could be accepted, where the goal then was find that place where he could be a guy and live that way. And I think so he could be comfortable, and that as a parent I could know that this was real. And I thought if we can do this for like a year and just then I'll know, like, okay, this is my, this is his path and this is who he is. So we found a place. We did have, he was suicidal, and it was pretty scary. But we found a place in Sebastopol, TLC in German high school, and they were amazing. They're known as a residential treatment center and high school that is very tuned into the LGBTQ community. So I worked with the school district, got him in there, and then in 2017, it was really just about, we were kind of coasting, like he was just living as a guy, and he wasn't at home. That was difficult, but I knew he was somewhere close, and we could have visits on weekends. And it was going really well. He transitioned from, they have girl houses and guy houses, and he transitioned pretty quick to the guy house, and took on a different name and lived there as a guy. And then 2018 was really about, he was 16, and that was really about, like, just let's get him back into the community. Like, he's really kind of come into himself, and now he's accepted by his peers, and he's comfortable with himself, and he still had a lot of anxiety and depression, but so he transitioned. So I worked with the school district and therapists, and just to get him back. I found a school here, Valley Oaks is a great one-on-one program for students. So he co-enrolled at Valley Oaks, and then he was at Petaluma High School for choir. So he could do, like, he could be in a big school environment, but not all the time. And that really worked for him. He needed that.
Can I interrupt a moment, please? Because you mentioned a really important word, and I'd love to bring in Hope and Abby also. You mentioned the word transition. He transitioned. And we hear that word a lot, and it can mean different things at different times. Like, it can mean simply anyone can transition. I transitioned to a new job, right? So at the same time, transition has a very specific meaning in the trans community, right? Meaning someone has changed in some way, and there's a big question mark about that word, and also some assumptions about transition, and some confusion. Like, some people might use the word, instead of using the word transition, some people might use transgender as a verb. They might say someone transgendered. But that isn't, it's not a verb, it's an adjective or an adverb sometimes. So, because it describes a state of being, which would be a verb. So, but it's not a noun, so we won't say a person is a transgender, and it's not the verb. The verb is transitioned, and the transition is also a noun because it's the thing, which is, but it can be so different for different people. people. So like example, let's just give an example. We maybe each can do that. My son, one of his earliest pieces of his transition was wearing boy underwear when he was 5. And I was like, why do I need to buy him boy underwear? I don't know if I feel comfortable with that. And my husband was like, why? Why does it bother you? So it's interesting because my husband was like, fine. I was confused because this was personal. Like, who sees the underwear? Why should my kid care? Because it's personal, right? So what's like something, do you want to share, I don't know, something that was important to you in making your transition? And maybe transition is in process, it's not complete. Like my son said his is complete for now. Is that an okay question?
Yeah.
Okay.
100%.
I think transitioning, like you said, it's not just medical, it's also like emotional, social, all those things. So like name changes, pronouns, hormones, all these things are different ways to transition. And I don't think that a transition can ever be fully complete. There's always going to be some aspect that doesn't feel completely like comfortable. That's just my experience. Others might feel a different way. But yeah, I think, and I think a lot of people misunderstand that like transitioning. Some parts of it are permanent, but most parts of it aren't permanent at all. Like, hormones can be reversed. Pronouns, hair, all those things, they're not permanent. And even there's studies that have shown that the amount of trans people who actually regret transitioning is very, very low.
And that is consistently shown. There was just a New York Times article and a Washington Post article about that very fact. So thanks. And Hope, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I have a couple things. For me, it's been a couple of years since I came out, so I'm moving along in my transition. Definitely still not as quick as I wish it could go, but good old laws. And so, what was I going to say? Okay. I think one of the most important things for me was starting puberty blockers and then going on estrogen about a month later. And it's a big process. You meet with an endocrinologist, you meet with your therapist, they diagnose you with gender dysphoria, you go back to the endocrinologist, they get the process started, you do blood draws, it's a whole thing. So when people say that kids are jumping into these transitions, it's really not true. There's so many steps that have to be taken to actually start the transition. And in my case, I wish that wasn't true because it takes a long time. But I think like going on estrogen and going on puberty blockers, for me, I've had an experience where there was something that happened where I wasn't able to be on puberty blockers for about 2 months, and there was another time a little bit longer ago where I was off puberty blockers and estrogen, and pretty much like the puberty blockers stayed in my system a little bit after, and then pretty much like a couple days after it had fully left my system, I noticed an immediate change where I was more depressed. I didn't feel comfortable in my body. I felt like really, really terrible. And it goes to show like transitioning is life or death for a lot of trans people. And these medical and social procedures that can be done are really, really, really important. And I can't stress that enough because like it genuinely saves lives to transition. And it it changes lives too. So it's a very important thing for a lot of trans people.
I have one question, and you don't have to answer it. So when you do choose to go on hormones, and this is also about your son Gabe too, because I saw that he was taking testosterone up there. So yes, freezing eggs and saving your sperm. Do they talk to you
Yeah.
about that, and do you get to have that choice? Because I
Yeah.
don't know.
So
Because that would be a long-term commitment.
yeah, so I went through that process, and I won't get into the details because it's
Well,
weird.
right.
But yeah,
But,
but yes, I did do sperm banking,
Okay.
and I was given the option for it, and it was kind of presented as like for me it was more of I don't necessarily feel the need to have biological kids, at the moment at least,
right.
and I feel comfortable with adopting, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. But I was given the option, and my thought process was like, why not do it? Because for the future, maybe I'll want this.
Yeah, for your partner.
Sometimes there are some regrets because it did cause extra dysphoria just because there was the process of kind of like doing it, and that made me very dysphoric. But I also think that it's good to have that option for the future as well. So, yeah.
Can I say something? It's a right. Reproductive health is a right. So if your child chose to transition, that is a benefit covered by health insurance. If that's something that they chose for themselves to save eggs or sperm.
Oh, okay. So
It's part of your reproductive health care, and it's a right, whether you choose to use it or not.
Yes,
That's
it's given
a
us
good
all.
perspective.
And that's in California and in many places, so,
But at least for now.
and at least for now, and, yeah. And, what tends to happen, and I do want to come back to Carol too, and storytelling, because I love storytelling, and also wanted to make sure that we're bringing them into the story and et cetera. It's easy to get caught up in the medical. Not that we don't want these questions, it's really important, but it is where we tend to focus in, and so just bearing that in mind, that I know a lot of our questions are going to be medical, and we're not the doctors, but when people share their experience, that's amazing. But what's a misnomer and a myth, a really big falsehood that's being put out there in the media right now is that kids are getting operated on or being given hormones. And that is not true until Tanner stage puberty. And they, as Hope said, we have found these to be life-saving interventions that are decided with medically trained people, the same place that you would seek out for your highest level of care. If your child had cancer, you would then go to this same institution, UCLA, UCSF, Boston Children's, LA Children's. All of these centers are also gender-affirming adolescent care centers. So these are centers that are putting very deep thought, and the parents and the doctors and the people themselves. And what's also known is that trans people have gone through way more therapy than most of us will ever do in order to do this, and that some are leaning towards less of that intervention. Definitely having psychological support, but less time because of what Hope and Abby, I'm sure, can also talk about, and Abby being younger has a different path right now. But like my son, by the time we understood, and I think same for you, we didn't have the access to puberty blockers anymore because our kids had already gone through puberty. And that's how most trans people have experienced until the last 15 years when UCLA and UCSF and Boston and started to do looking at adolescence and how we could make a difference sooner so that more trans people live. And that is really what it's coming down to, is saving lives, and that's why I do this work. So, you know, I don't always focus on that because I think it can be like, I'm gonna go to the alarmist thing right away. But that is alarming, and the statistics are alarming of how many trans youth report attempted suicide. I don't want to play a guessing game, but I don't think
There's
you
actually-
can imagine.
There's new statistics that have came out, and it says that in 2021, 1 out of every 4 LGBTQ youth have attempted suicide. That is a very high number.
Yeah.
It's frightening, and for trans youth, it's around 40% have attempted suicide. That's why I say it's life and death. Like, there's so many cases where even going on hormones, not even having the surgeries, could have saved lives.
Yes.
And having that taken away in some of these states is so... I don't understand how lawmakers are doing these things, because it's so obvious to me that these things can save lives, and it's really, really easy because there's a whole set out process for it. And so, yeah, it's so important, and the statistics prove it. So.
The statistics, and of course, I mean, and then you think, you know, oh well, Marin County, I have the statistics in my mind for us. Oh, we're so liberal and we're so aware. And no, they're really high, really high. I see a question.
I was just going to encourage everybody to look at the Trevor Project.
Yes.
Statistic breakdown, they do a national breakdown that covers all of it, and great place to go to if you're looking for hard numbers.
Or just anything. The Trevor Project is a great resource.
Yeah, for anything LGBT, especially with youth, and they have a crisis line that's 24 hours, and it's not just for the youth, it's for families, for educators, for anyone who needs that support. We also have local support. So coming back to Carol, and then I have some more questions to add in, but I want you to bring out, you know, these pieces of like, I met Gabe and you when he was hormones, and there was a distinct shift when he went on his hormones and when he had his surgeries.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really thought about all of this in a long time, and kind of dug up all my paperwork and notes and photos, and because now the game I know is just a very whole, happy, thriving person.
Oh my gosh.
And I guess the last thing I really wanted to say is, because I've been judged by other people saying that I wanted to, I was just trying to keep my kid alive, so I let him, chop off his boobs, and let him do this stuff, and just let him do all this crazy stuff, just to keep him alive. And I've heard that, and it hurts, but I think, it's not really what was going on. I mean, I did want to keep him alive, but my goal as a parent was to help foster in my kids their ability to trust an inner compass. And it's always been that. Before my kid came out as trans, it was, just all the little decisions that they made. And I didn't grow up that way. I grew up in a very strict Catholic, and there's parts of that I loved, but I was not really, my inner compass was not really something that was developed, and so I felt it very important. There's people out there in the world, I want my kids to trust themselves and not have like this dual, what do I do? And I just wanted it to be very solid, and this was just one aspect of that with my son. And so far, yeah, I mean, he's doing quite well.
You mentioned this word about being whole. And I think we can all relate to that. Like there's times in our lives where we feel, okay, I'm home. And there might be times in our lives where we're thinking, there's something. And maybe it isn't about gender for us. But I think this piece, you know, where my child, complete for now, you describe whole, and then we hear Hope talking about, I mean, thank you for sharing that, you're in the midst, right? And so it's like, when will I feel whole? And I hope that hearing some stories, like for me, going and meeting other trans people, living a good, happy life was key. And I went and found them. And also learning from people who were in the midst. And so I think I'd like to ask, like, what is, like, when my child had his top surgery, which is the change from a female to a male chest, we went to the Trans March in San Francisco, and it was a warm day. It was part of the Pride celebration, Trans March. And he took off his shirt at this Trans March, and he was 15, or he was young, and he was getting high fives and just all these wonderful affirmations. And it made me see the joy, the trans joy. So to go from gender dysphoria to gender euphoria. This is where my child was. I mean, seeing him get his bandages off was like witnessing a rebirth of my child. It was very powerful, and I felt bad that my husband wasn't there. And I didn't know that that's how I feel, and I also resisted the idea of it. It's not like I went just like la 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 and came out with a book and a kid, and no. It was hard because there weren't panels like this, and there weren't people. It was one place, Gender Spectrum, who are amazing, and they are still my thought leaders, and they do great conferences, and there's a great conference in Sonoma called Trans Life. That's another great place to be with. Positive Images up here in Santa Rosa. There's a PFLAG here in Petaluma. There are resources locally. But coming back to that feeling of wholeness and that not feeling of wholeness, which can be called dysphoria, what's something, if you want to share, and maybe you can reflect on with Gabe, that does give you gender euphoria?
You want to answer first? Okay. Well, very simple one, getting gendered correctly.
Did you hear that part, getting gendered correctly? So
Yeah.
people using correct pronouns, your right name.
I've had a very good experience with getting gendered correctly with people that are close to me. For the most part, within a couple of months of me coming out, I wasn't getting misgendered by family anymore. And of course there's the occasional slip up, but at this point it's just like mixing it up with someone else in their mind. So it's not even me anymore, which feels pretty good. But I still have the experiences of at school, nobody but my friends really genders me correctly, and that makes me feel so dysphoric. So when, I can share an experience that I had. I was walking home with someone that I hadn't talked to in a couple of years, and he knew me before my transition. And we were walking home, and I mentioned something about having my name legally changed, and the first thing he asked me after hearing that was, "Oh, what are your pronouns?" And just having someone ask that, and then having them use my pronouns immediately after that, it feels so affirming and so good to just have someone, make the switch. And I don't expect anyone to be perfect. I understand that there's definitely a change in someone's mind, especially with my parents. They were living with a kid for 15 years or 14 years or whatever it was when I came out, that had used he, him pronouns and gone by a different name. That's going to be a switch. Of course, I'll give time and be understanding, but there's a point when I can tell when someone isn't putting in the effort. If there's change for being gendered correctly, I really appreciate that, and it makes me feel very good, because even though I feel like, oh, I probably don't seem like whatever my gender is at the moment to other people, and I probably never will because people don't look at people and go, oh, they're non-binary. It's more of like, oh, that's a girl, or oh, that's a boy. But I think just like having people use your pronouns and having people respect that, and when people knew me as a different name, which doesn't really happen now, but when people did, having people use the correct name for me, there's simple things that you can do. Might not feel too simple in your mind, but once you put the effort in, and it's like calling someone by a different name who isn't trans. Once you do that, it does have a very positive effect on people that are trans because it makes them feel affirmed in their identity. So.
You actually answered 2 questions at once, so good job.
I definitely agree a lot with what they said. I think it really helps when people are able to make improvements. Because you can really tell when someone's not trying to use your correct pronouns or gender. But just trying is really helpful, and I think it gives a lot of euphoria around gender. I think definitely I dress more femininely, and I identify as a girl, so it's a lot easier for me. And I don't get misgendered that often. But when I do, it's still difficult. But it's really great when people gender me correctly and use my pronouns and name.
Can I share something? And I didn't ask you, Abby, but I think you'll be okay with this. So I'm Abby's dad. And I just remember a moment like that where we were at the local elementary school, after school, and Abby was learning to skateboard. This was maybe a couple years ago. And, you know, she's practicing her tricks, and I'm watching her. And this little kid comes up, who's probably 5, and kind of watches Abby for a while. Is really curious, and then finally says something to the effect of, you know, what's she doing? Is she learning to skateboard? And I just saw the light in Abby. I saw that those pronouns really affected her positively. And it was really moving for me because of that.
I remember that.
He said, what is she doing?
I think that's actually the first time also that that someone used my name, like outside of my friend group, which is really great.
And for me, it's a little bit different, but I've had people say, are you a boy or a girl? And for me, that's like, yes! People can't tell if I'm a boy or a girl. Let's go, that's what I'm looking for. So that's kind of like my similar experience, feeling like that's affirming for me, which is kind of fun. Yeah.
Is that what you would say is agender, that androgynous?
I've thought about my identity a lot, and for me,
and I'm not trying to pigeonhole you.
yeah, no. For me, it's like I don't really feel like I fit into, or I don't even know what my gender identity would be. But I don't necessarily feel like agender, and I guess now that I'm thinking about it, another thing that I could add to my description of agender is kind of like not feeling like you have, like feeling like you don't have a gender. And that's not necessarily what I feel, but I also don't not feel that way, so it's very confusing. So what I've chosen to identify as is genderqueer, which is another fun way of putting words to something that can't be described. Because I genuinely have no idea what my gender identity is, so I just kind of label it as genderqueer because it's a good umbrella term for a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, a person who's not here, Alex, who is non-binary, who used to do panels with me, would describe their gender as not male, not female, another gender that is called non-binary. Meaning not female, not male, because male and female are the binary. And Alex was assigned female at birth, or is. They do not feel female and definitely would rather be seen as a boy than as a girl, but truly they're neither. And non-binary is a word that describes a whole nother gender. For some people, that's what they would follow it, because it is one of those terms that, just like transgender used to mean someone felt the opposite of their sex assigned at birth, now it means other than their sex assigned at birth, and it's a much bigger umbrella, and then words like non-binary have come in to just help people describe this experience that is very human, but perhaps until more recently have not had as many descriptive words.
Can you comment on that? Can you comment on what you just said?
Which part specifically?
The non-binary word versus I don't know who I am.
Yeah, well I think, I definitely do identify as non-binary. I think there's two kind of different but also similar definitions of non-binary, where you have I'm not a girl, I'm not a guy, I'm somewhere in between. And then there's kind of like I'm not a girl, I'm not a guy, and then I have no idea. There's like a whole spectrum of stuff in between. And I think I identify a little bit more with the second one, because I don't think I'm like directly in the middle, but I definitely know that I don't really identify as a guy and I don't really identify as a girl, so just somewhere in the middle.
Do you want to say it? Yeah.
Yeah,
You
and
can just
then,
say it just from what you understand from
yeah, so, right, from what I understand from you, that's a good way of putting it, because
because we don't
I
have the same.
feel differently from him, but my son is very black and white, and I think that's why he went through a lot of the stuff he went through, is he feels like the world is binary, and has a very difficult time with the whole concept that he is this male in what used to be a female body, and felt huge self-loathing and like a mistake. And it wasn't anything that I mean, I'm an artist, like I'm, I'm very open-minded, and so it was something that he developed in his mind. The world has to be binary, it has to be this way. So he struggles a lot with the concept of non-binary, where I don't. I just feel like people are people who are trying to find where we land, and so everyone's kind of different that way.
See a lot of hands. This is amazing. Let's go to you.
I really appreciate you sharing that. I have the permission to share that I also have a transgender son, and something that really helped me, and his timeline, you could put it on yours.
Oh, wow.
Almost, I think, very small details.
Yeah.
He's a sophomore at UC Santa Cruz right
Oh, okay.
now, and thriving, which is the word that I love. But when I was trying to understand this when he was 14, because I didn't know, I knew what gay was, but I didn't know what transgender was. And I said, well, if you had a spectrum of like 0 is neutral and 5 is like way girly on one side and 5 way masculine, like the husband at the time was. where are you? And he said, well, I'm about a 2 male. And I said, that's great, because I'm like a 2 or 3 female. And and he felt like the labels helped at that point when he was first transitioning, and I don't know if that's something for you guys, but now I don't think that, it is always a transition. He wears nail polish because he said his love for nail polish supersedes his need to conform to society's stereotypes. And those are the many things that we've learned being parents of you amazing children. Thank you.
We have just a few minutes, but I want to point out, you brought up this theory called the gender abacus, and if you just go Google that, there's a whole, it's written by Joel Olson, who's a doctor at UCLA, or LA Children's Center, and it's the gender abacus, and you know what an abacus is. I usually have mine, but I brought the wrong bag. I have an abacus, right? And so if we put gender, identity, expression, like you were just describing this scale. Let me move 2 beads. Let me move, and then who you're attracted to, and go look up the gender abacus. We don't have time for me to go find my slides and everything, but that is great. It's like we all exist on a spectrum, and yes, we may lean far one way or far the other, but why? Why? Because society has ways of behaving, and whether we consciously do it or not, we are signaling to people, this is me, and you're looking for your like people. So like, I mean, I have so many questions still for the panel, but I know you do too, and we're like at time. But I also feel like there's this idea of like, you have to look a certain way in order to be considered someone or something. And like, even think about when men first started growing their hair long in our country, in our recent time, so the 60s, and it was girly girl and this and that, and earrings, and how that was so taboo, and now so many guys have earrings, and so many women have short hair and come in with, no makeup, and that's okay too, and there's so many ways to be a person, and until there's people being treated with respect and equality. I mean, some of the statistics that were mentioned are not just for youth, it is for adults too. The smallest number of trans people percentage-wise is in the senior population, and we believe that it's because people were so in the closet. And instead of thinking of people coming out, think of them as inviting us in. And I just want to say thank you so much. I wish we could talk longer. We could have like a 2-hour presentation. But this idea that you invited us in and let us hear some of your very personal and private story. And that takes a lot of courage. And it is courageous to be who we are in a world that is constantly policing us all. Women should be a certain weight. Men should not cry. All these things, thank you for showing up as your authentic selves. Thank Gabe in advance in the line for me. And just thank you so much for sharing your stories. And we'll be here for more conversation, but I do want to just honor that it is time, and I just want to say thank you for being a respectful and interested audience. We're all here if you want to come and talk to us individually, and please check out my book. It's our story of our family. It's written inclusively with our community, my mother, my kids' grandparents, my husband, teachers, therapists, friends, siblings, all wrote for this book. And so it's educational, it's memoir, it's inspiring, it's funny, it's sad, all those things. So thank you so much to the library and to all of you. And to you.
Thank you.